So everyone,
Hello,
welcome
hello.
to the China Career Summit. This panel is BIPOC in China, navigating opportunities, misconceptions in your career. So essentially, we're going to be discussing the experience of people in color in China. As many of you know, there aren't many people of color who are in the China space, are living in China. And so we're going to discuss that experience and really give some tips and understanding and insights on that. Today, I have three special guests with me. Elsa will be joining once we figure out some technical issues on her side. But for right now, we have Olivia Nadine, who is one of my personal friends that I met while I was spending time in Beijing and living in Beijing. She is the founder of BlackExpo and a wonderful, amazing baker with a company called Tianmi Bakery. And we also have JAMEL MIMS. He is a storyteller, multimedia artist, and a bilingual rapper by the moniker MC Tingbudong, although he definitely Tingbudong. Um, and Jamel Mims is also one of my alma mater fellow Trojan. So I also went to USC. So when I saw that in your bio, I was super excited. So welcome, Jamel and Olivia, and I'll introduce Elsa when she comes. But first off, why don't you all tell me a little bit about yourself? So Olivia, why don't you start off? Tell me a little bit about who you are and what you're doing and where you're based.
Yeah. So, hi everyone. Cleo, thank you for having me. I'm Olivia. I'm from America, from Washington D.C., and I did my my BA at Ohio State with International Business and Chinese. And I did my MA with Georgetown, Masters in Asian Studies. And so I've been coming in and out of China since 2010. And so I decided to move in 2016, got a job with Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in the Beijing office. Was out here with them for 3 years, and then in 2019 decided to leave to do more with BlackExpo, which Cleo mentioned, and with the bakery. And so 2019, right before apparently the pandemic, I decided to become an entrepreneur. Didn't know it was before a pandemic, but it was. And then went home for Christmas, came back January 2020, and have still been here. Haven't left since then. So I'm still in Beijing right now. So it's like 11 p.m. for me. So I'm still in Beijing, still doing BlackExpo. It's looking a little bit different based on a lot of the things that have shifted here, but still moving, still trying to get things moving out here. So that's kind of the quick and dirty introduction.
Thank you, Olivia, especially for joining us so late in the night for you. And Jamel, why don't you tell us all a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Olivia, a real pleasure to meet you, especially somebody else that comes from DC. I definitely know that there's a lot of DC love, around the conference with the other organizations that are here. So shout outs to Southeast, Southeast. So what's up, everybody? My name is JAMEL MIMS, aka MC Tingbudong, and I'm a bilingual rapper, multimedia artist, and revolutionary. I got a Fulbright to study hip hop in China in 2008. And began studying Mandarin Chinese in high school at Sidwell Friends School in DC. And I had always been asking my kind of language teachers, where is the hip hop? All throughout high school, all throughout college, listening to like Jay Cho, Cho Jalun, or like Eason Chan, to try to find out, like, okay, well, where's the rap? Who's got bars? Like, where are they at? And this is, in the early 2000s, before China was, or before rap was at the levels of astronomical popularity that exists today in China. And so I'd always been asking this question. And in 2006, I got a chance to be a part of a program called Sexy Beijing, where they did a profile on hip hop in China. And that was really a night at Yugong Shen where I earned the moniker MC Tingbudong. I can share that in a story a little later, but that was the beginning of a whole kind of door opening and a process opening of, over a decade of engagement with China, and in particular around the hip hop community and youth culture in China. And so super excited to be here and to join this conversation.
Thank you, Jamel. You know, I listened to a couple of your songs and I was just like, being able to rap in Chinese is a feat in and of itself. So thank you for coming. And we're really excited to hear about your insights. And we also have Elsa Alvarado. Thank you for joining us. And I'm glad your technical issues are finally fixed. So tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you're working for the State Department right now, the Department of Defense right now. So tell us, you know, what you're doing and where you're based and how you're connected with China.
Yeah, so I'm based in DC, and I currently work at DoD as the Strategic Communications Director in Legislative Affairs. So I'm definitely in the political world. I was on the Biden campaign before this, but right before I joined the campaign, I was at Schwarzman Scholars doing my year in China. And I had always wanted to know more about the China space, especially because one of our top defense priorities is dealing with China. And so that was the reason why I applied to Schwarzman. And so right now I'm in this political space, but looking towards the future, I'd love to get into the think tank world, probably go back and get another degree.
Thank you, Elsa. And so, you know, one of my favorite questions to ask people who are in the China space, who are dealing with China, is why were you initially interested in China in the first place? So, Olivia, why don't you take that question? Why China?
Yeah. So growing up, I just watched a lot of travel shows, a lot of PBS, and was into history. And so I remember watching kind of those shows about the history of China and the whole 5,000 years of history. And, you know, in America, we have maybe, what, 400 or 500 years of history, barely. And so to hear about 5,000 years and the great inventions and like just this culture that's gone through millennia, I think that's just very interesting. And so it gave more to dig into. And then when I went to college, my major was going to be international business or international affairs. And so I was trying to figure out what language I wanted to do. And being a native English speaker, it was like, well, that's already done. Standard for all people who go to DCPS is like you take French or you take Spanish. So you've already done your bare minimum that you know you're not going to really keep going. So I was like, I need another language, and a billion people speak Chinese or Mandarin, so why not go with Mandarin? And plus, right around then, this was 2008, 2009, and so this is post-Olympics. Everyone's talking about China. It's been in the WTO for 7 years at that point, so the ascension, and so it was growth. And so it just made a lot of sense. It was kind of like if you were studying Japanese in like the 70s and 80s, you're like, okay, that makes sense because of what they were going through in their economic boom. And so that was how I got started. And then I did my first trip to Hong Kong in 2009 and kind of got hooked, and then did an exchange in 2010 for one semester in 2010. And I was so like completely hooked on China. I was at Beida and I did the business school over there and loved the experience, loved the growth, loved the traveling opportunities. Getting to interact with the culture was interesting. And so just to test all of that together. And I just saw that China was a place where I would grow, that I would break out of whatever paradigm that is fun but kind of limiting at home, that limiting mindset of this is how things have to be, especially growing up in DC. DC is a very 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. You do this, you move up this ladder, you do this step, this step, this step kind of place. And you go to China and it's like, yeah, whatever rules you thought you had, they do not apply. And that can be fun, that can be stressful. It depends on who you are. Or it's both at the same time. It's fun and stress. And so I was hooked since then, and I've been coming and going. And so I've lived here since 2016. But between PBS and being an exchange student, that's really what got me hooked.
Thank you, Olivia. And we'll definitely circle back to this idea of breaking, you know, traditional paradigms and really seizing opportunities in China. What about you, Jamel? Why China?
Yeah, I was just about to say PBS is the gateway. Yeah, so PBS is the gateway for sure. Yeah, I think for me it was a similar story where as I was growing up, you know, I think there was a lot of regional cultural influence from like Japan and China on, you know, on the youth cultures that surrounded us that we grew up in. So whether that was like hip hop culture, anime, what's now called like blurred culture or otaku culture, but um, so that had a huge influence on me. And so I started, like taking Japanese classes and learning Japanese in like middle school. And by the time I got to high school, similar story, going from DCPS into the private school system, had taken like French or Spanish, and they essentially wanted me to go into that track. And I thought like, oh, I'd really like to take Chinese so that I can learn kanji and keep up my Japanese. And I remember immediately the teacher that I was working with, or the teacher that was the dean of the school, really being like, are you sure you want to take Chinese 1? Maybe you should start with Spanish 2 or French 2, something that's a little closer. Chinese is really difficult. You're coming from a neighborhood where like there aren't a lot of students, usually coming to our school. And so we don't want you to have any extra difficulties, right? And so this idea of like learning Chinese and was always enmeshed with this, with the way that society saw, for me, was always enmeshed with the way that society saw, Black and brown people. These things weren't separate experiences for me. And so from there, started taking Mandarin in high school, was always looking for kind of a cultural node to fix, thinking like, oh man, I'll really be able to take off in this language if I can like learn a song in it, or if I know all of like Q-Tip's lyrics, everything from A Tribe Called Quest. If there was a group out there that was like that and I learned their lyrics, man, I would be so dope at Chinese. And so I'm always asking my teacher, where's the music? What should I listen to? And was always, thought I was a very good student at Chinese and could, follow directions very well and memorize characters very well. But would go to a restaurant, in DC's like block long Chinatown and just would be bewildered. Couldn't, jump in the chat if you've had that experience of like studying Chinese for like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, can't say anything, seeing all your friends in French and Spanish class, like go to restaurants and order and have cultural experiences. And so that I got a chance to study abroad in 2007 with a program called the Beijing Center at 对外经贸大学 in Beijing at UIBE. And that was like the floodgates crashing open, and then finally jumping into, like 8 years of pent up Mandarin aggression, just bow, 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 coming out all through the year. And then, and continuing to ask that question, pursue that question, where's the hip hop in China? I had a photography teacher there, Walter Gregg, who introduced me to a colleague of his, whose partner was doing a feature story on like the hip hop scene in China, invited me to be a part of that. And at that night, I'm wearing a t-shirt that says Tingbudong, and I jump up on stage and I'm rapping and meet a bunch of different people in SAR and Nasty Ray, a bunch of different folks in the 2008 Beijing hip hop scene, and people are like, oh, hey, what's up? 他是 MC 听不懂，他的 T 恤上都说听不懂，但是他真的听得懂，造起来 MC 听不懂。And so that was kind of like the night where MC Tingbudong was really born. And then I had a friend that suggested that I go back and apply for a Fulbright to be a part of to go and pursue that research. And then so a year after that, I ended up staying, basically living with a number of the folks that I met that night for a year-long stay to really research in depth like the hip-hop community in Beijing. And so that was really and from there, continuing exchange. But those are the things that really got me in and kept me hooked.
No, I think especially your story about the languages is really important. For me, when I first started learning Chinese, everyone said, oh, it's hard, and I'm tone deaf actually. So it's really difficult to learn a tonal language when you're tone deaf. But I found that if you really dedicate yourself, even if you're really essentially naturally bad at languages, you can certainly learn Chinese. And unfortunately, a lot of Black and brown people are discouraged from learning other languages and doing things that are considered to be hard and difficult. So I'm glad that you took those negative experiences and crafted a great experience and are able to really integrate yourself into Chinese hip hop culture. And Elsa, you did mention that you were interested in going to China because China is such an important, in terms of America's strategy, is very important in that context. But why did you feel like you needed to be in China in order to understand it?
Yeah, so I initially heard about Schwarzman Scholars in 2015 at a Hispanic Scholarship Fund conference. And one of the speakers was actually one of the interviewers for the scholarship. And he mentioned that so many students apply, but the amount of Latino students that apply was minimal. And he said, if we have so many Latinos in the country, why are they not going to China and becoming China experts? And so that was the first motivator as to why I specifically wanted to go to Beijing to learn about their political system, to learn about their society firsthand, because I knew when I came back, I would be one of the few people that had that skill set within my community. So that was kind of the first thing. The second thing was that I just love being abroad. And so when I was in college, I went to Middlebury, did political science. I studied in Paris. So I did French, I did that track, and felt like I knew a good amount about European politics. But I wanted to add more to my repertoire of foreign policy. So putting those two together, it was the perfect opportunity for me to jump into the China space. And my friend and I, that both went to this conference, ended up being the two Latinas from the US representing the US in the Schwarzman program. And so that's still something that I'm actively trying to help the program with, is recruiting more Latinos to become those foreign policy experts, and then hopefully work in government or in private sector in the US.
Yes, definitely. And I'd love to hear, your thoughts a little bit later on in the conversation about the Latin American community in China. I know personally during my 8 years in China, I actually only ever met people who were Spanish speaking, but from other Latin American countries. And I really didn't meet any Latin American people. So I'd love for you to speak on that. So one of my shifting gears more about the experience itself. So Kanye West, one of my favorite rappers. So, you can judge me if you want. Fun fact, he lived in Beijing when he was about 10 or 11 years old. And he said it prepared him to become a celebrity. And one of the reasons why he said that is because there are so few Black people in China, right? And so he said he would get ogled and stared at and things like that. And so I'm interested in hearing from all of you. Do you still feel like that is true today? I mean, Kanye West, he was in China some odd 30 years ago. And then how do you deal with being a novelty in China, if that is your experience? So, Olivia, do you want to start with that one? I see you smirking already.
So it's Golden Week over here. And so for those who are unindoctrinated, Golden Week is the national holiday that celebrates the founding of the country, and everyone gets a full week, or everyone who's not in a service industry job gets a full week off so that we go travel. So I literally just got back from travel today, and we went to a little town called I think it was Qinghuangdao, Beidaihe, and we went there, beachside town, and just 2 hours from Beijing. But we ended up staying, short story, but we ended up staying at a 5-star hotel because our Airbnb flaked on us. And it was just funny from the moment the door opened. Now the customer service was actually good, but it was like the other guests were just like, "You here, huh?" And it was just like that for 4 days and 3 nights. And me being extra, I had a big old black hat, nice sun hat. It was like, I already know y'all are gonna look. Let me give you something worth looking at. But I mean, like, just being on the beach, just existing, just breathing, just talking, laughing, you're getting stared at. Sometimes you're used to it. Sometimes you're blocking it out. Sometimes, you let them know that you speak Chinese. So it's always been an experience, but I'll never forget 2 early experiences that kind of shaped how I deal with it for the last, I guess, 11 years now. Is one, I was at exchange student at Beida, and if you've ever been, there's a bridge that goes from where the international students, you walk over this long bridge to get to the actual campus, and it crosses like the 4th Ring Road or something. But one day I'm walking, t-shirt, so my arms are out, and this random guy is going up, and I'm going down, and he sees my arm, he sees his arm, and he's like, "Whoa, look, they're different." And I'm like, like, I don't know what to say to that. It obviously wasn't malicious, but it was just like, he was genuinely just fascinated that I have an arm, and he has an arm, and these two are not the same arms. So that was just like, he was genuinely fascinated. And the other experience was I was an intern with State Department in 2011 in the north. So I was in Xinjiang, and we went to Dandong one weekend just to see out there, and we were at we would call it the Korean War Museum, but they call it the War on American Aggression Museum. And so we went to that museum, and we're out there just walking around, and I'm with two other interns, who happen to be two white women, and this woman starts talking to us in Chinese, and she turns to the first woman, "Where are you from?" "America." "Oh, wonderful." Second woman, "Where are you from?" "America." "Oh, wonderful." Me, and this is all in Chinese, and she turns to me, "So where are you from?" And I'm like, "America." "Nah, you can't be from America." It's like, "Why?" "Because you're black." I was like, America has so many different colors of people. Because I was just saying it in the simplest Chinese I could, and she's like, and the look on her face was like, "You're lying." And I'm like, I have no reason to lie. And so it's very interesting because at home, no one doubts that we're American. Black, white, different. At least as a black person in America, you don't have to prove your Americanness. I know other friends of other nationalities, that's a different story. But at least as a black American, I don't have to prove it. But out here, I'm like, well, they're like, "Where are you from? Let me guess." And they'll go through every African country that they can think of. And when I'm like, "Nope." And they're like, "Where?" I'm like, "America." I don't know. And this was during Obama's presidency. So it's very interesting to just constantly be a novelty. And then when people do try to get to know you, even on the surface level, then to have to kind of defend who you actually are. And it's a very interesting balance to kind of do. But a lot of times I just realized that my ignoring game has gotten really strong. I thought it was good in the city. But being out here, if I really looked at everyone who looked at me, if I looked at everyone who took a picture, if I looked at everyone who stopped and stared, I would never get anything done. So it's taught me to focus.
And do you feel that you've been able to at least somewhat integrate within local Chinese culture? Do you feel like yes, no, maybe?
No, and I wish I had a different answer. I found you can make, for me at least, I found that I can make quick friends, but not real friends. I've actually had my best Chinese friends that I still have. I made at university. I made at Ohio State, and they're still good friends. And I still message them. I was actually messaging one of them like a couple of hours ago. But out here, I find people want to speak English with you, but making a real connection, I haven't figured out how to do that. And it didn't help that my first job was an American-based think tank in China. So we're all speaking in English. We're all speaking about America, American politics. And so my coworkers at the time, they were friends. But even I noticed, and it was kind of organic, but it was just like after, the job is over, the friendship kind of went with the contract. So I haven't figured out how to do it, but I'm assuming others have, but I've just found it to be very difficult to figure that out.
Okay. And what about you, JAMEL?
Yeah, I think this is this is a really potent discussion topic, right? I mean, I think one of the first things for me that was really jarring, going to China for the first time was seeing like things like Hey Ren Ya Gao in the store, and black man toothpaste, which it's you go to the store and it's like, well, what is this relic from like 1930 segregated America with like Uncle Tom in a top hat, selling toothpaste? Like, how the hell is this even possible? And why? It just was kind of like jarring. And I can, I think there's so much texture to the stories you're telling, Olivia, of like that feeling of isolation. I remember so much of that, or so much of the Fulbright experience was feeling very very isolated and alone. Times where you didn't want to like actually even go out of the house because you didn't want to have to like deal with all of the questions or people coming up to ask you pictures, or like it's raining and I remember being in like Xinjiang and it was raining. Guy comes up to my skin and is like, thinking it would like wash off, but it's, I think the thing about it and the difference with it, is that it's not actually backed by the state, in the West and in America in particular, as a country that's like really founded on white supremacy, and the genocide of Native peoples. As a core function of this country, white supremacy is a core function of it, and there's actually a police, a military, courts that all actually back that up. Right before I was actually supposed to go, before I was to go on the Fulbright, it was actually a trip that was frankly was not about to happen. I was at a party in Boston, right after graduating college, get dragged out in the party ends. We're in downtown Boston. We get dragged out in the street by Boston police. They start grabbing people up, this was like a streetwear party in 2008. And they are not used to seeing, Black and brown people walking through the streets in Boston and start, grabbing people up, start dragging me out into the street. I'm at the time yelling, you don't know who you're messing with. I got a Fulbright scholarship, blah, 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 blah. And, I don't have a diploma to show them. They're like, no, you don't. They come over and, basically kick my ass in the street and arrest me with, four or five other people. And, and I'm thinking, oh man, these guys are really going to get it when they hear from the State Department. The next morning, I get a call from the State Department and they're like, well, we're going to have to actually put your grant in jeopardy because we heard you got into some trouble with the law. And so actually, you're going to have to come down here and explain this to us. And so I found myself in the position in 2008 and 2009, having to explain police murder and brutality in America to people who were supposed to be representing the U.S. around the world. And so, that was a real breaking point for me. And I think it actually helped to realize and show that it is a system that we live under. And in particular, that it's a system that we live under. And so what do I mean by why am I highlighting these two stories? Is to show that on one hand, it's state backed, and anywhere you go as a Black or brown person in the world, because of the way that the world is situated on the back of the colonial experience, you're going to go on those same trade routes, right? You're going to go in and experience a lot of that same shit, right? Anywhere in the world that you travel, right? The difference between a place like America and a place like China is that it's, on the one hand, it's actually backed by state oppression. And then on the other hand, there is actually a real history of relations between China and America, Black America and Africa, and one that have actually shared mutual interests as far as emancipating humanity and the world. That there's a lot of that I actually, when you traveled into out of the city and into the rural areas and connected with people there, found a lot of connection with that. But yeah, I have some more stories to share, but I wanted to share those, in response to this question about how are you dealing with these types of things, like people asking to touch your hair and stuff like that. In 2018, I was actually part of a program called Found Sound China that brought Chinese and American musicians over to China for a collaborative music performance and tour. And we stopped in Dali. And if anyone has ever been there, it's like Disneyland, but for Chinese national minorities. And we were walking through this Disneyland, and I was there myself, and the producers who was on the trip is a Black dude from Baltimore named U4. And this is his first time in China, and he's just like, what the hell? Everyone's staring at us. They're literally fireworks going on over here, people in costume over here, but everyone's wanting to run up to us and throw us babies and take pictures with us, And so, I ended up actually writing, a song about it that was, from the perspective of Jim Kelly, who's this kung fu artist from who's in the Black dude from Into the Last Dragon, or from The Last Dragon. And the lyrics are walking through Disneyland, but I'm the main attraction. Everybody want to flick with Black Belt Jones. I get it. You wonder where I come from, or think I'm Lee Hay Schwai, but I wonder where do all those pictures of me end up? Where do all those pictures of me end up? 每一次都每一次，我出门听到黑一次，你呀怎么那么黑？我都以为美国人不是那么颜色。你自己卷的头发，我可以摸一下。中国好玩吗？你觉得怎么样啊？可以跟你交相啊？你中文为什么那么棒？你听不懂还是听得懂？而且这些问题懂不听，一会儿会告诉你。找一个好友，在我的微信搜我不搜你。And so it's just, it's all about all these questions that you get asked, but at the root of it, it's actually about us working together to uncover the actual structures, in particular, the structures of white supremacy that have gone global that make people think this way.
No, that's definitely a powerful experience. I know for me, I lived in China for 8 years. That's how I met Olivia when I was living in Beijing. And experiencing all of the Black Lives Matter movement and, the police brutality and all those videos through comments and sharing of my Chinese friends and my Chinese colleagues, basically asking me questions about why is this happening, like what's wrong with the U.S., and kind of experiencing that in another culture, in another country, definitely defined some experiences for me. So it was great to hear you really talk about that and the differences between the U.S. and China in your lived experience. Elsa, I'm curious to know, while you're at Tsinghua and Schwarzman Scholars, were you able to integrate with the local Tsinghua community and the students there? For anyone who doesn't know, Tsinghua is one of the most prestigious schools alongside Beida, which is where I went. So yeah, I'd love to hear you talk more about that.
Yeah, I found it really difficult to integrate in the Tsinghua community, and partly because Schwarzman scholars have their own building, their own dining hall, all of their classes are in our building. So it really took a lot of effort on our end to explore the community itself. So the best way that I was able to kind of, get a taste of the campus was being involved in extracurriculars. And so we started a salsa club, and it started first just at Schwarzman Scholars, and then we kind of opened it up to the broader campus, and we had like over 100 students coming to learn salsa that would come to our building. And so that was an easy way to kind of integrate through music and dance. But I did find that in terms of talking to students, as soon as I said I'm American and I'm here learning about your government, they didn't want to really talk, which is fair. And so I felt like a lot of the close friends I made were other international students from Schwarzman, a lot of them being Latin American. And so while I didn't face, weird reactions or interactions in the streets, I actually found that a lot of Chinese people had a lot of interactions with Latin Americans. And so they assumed that I was from Latin America. But when they saw that I had an American side to that, they thought it was really interesting that I could kind of have both identities. But yeah.
And, so I want to focus now on kind of the communities that you all were involved in or are involved in China. For Olivia and Jamel, for me, over the 8 years when I first came to China, this was 2010, right after I graduated from uni. And at that time, I hadn't met many Black Americans in China at all. It was like we didn't exist. Every Black person that I met, the few that I did meet, were all from the African diaspora. And then eventually, I would say in the last 3 or 4 years of my time in China, I started to see a real surgence of Black people in China and a real community, both of African American people, but also of the Black diaspora. So I'm curious to know, for both Olivia and Jamel specifically around also, your involvement with the hip hop community. How are you involved with the Black diaspora and the Black community in China? How do you see the growth of that? And what do you think that community, what role is it playing in building bridges between Black people and Chinese people? So whoever wants to start. Okay, Jamel.
Oh, no. I was going to defer to you. I'm deferring to you, Olivia.
Sure. I would have to speak in two ways. I would have to speak pre-COVID and post-COVID, because those are two very different experiences. So yeah, like I mentioned before, when I first came here in 2010 as an exchange student, I came with a program that had, another American exchange students and I think other European and American exchange students from all over the world. And so, but I was the only Black, period. Doesn't matter what country you're going to say you're from. I was the only person that had, nice dark skin and all the melanin. And I remember distinctly that one of the kids was like, "Oh, you must be Olivia." And I was like, "Why?" He was like, And I was like, "Okay, so it's only me. All right, cool." So, and funny enough, when I actually came that time, my mom, 2 of my aunts came. And so my mom, they made it like a girls' trip, and they came for 10 days. And within those 10 days, my mother somehow found another Black American woman who had a child that was exchange student there. And she was like, she did what all mamas do. She got her contact information and said, "Here, you're going to make yourself a friend And I think and I actually did meet up with that young lady, and she was also the only person that looked like her in her own program as well. I have no idea how my mother found her and her mother in this big old city, but she managed to. And so I got used, but growing up where I grew up, growing up in DC, going to the schools I went to, going to Ohio State, I've gotten used to being the only one, going to business school and all of that. I was the only Black person in my master's program, master's in Asian studies. I was the first of 3 years, of 3 classes, and I was the only one. So it wasn't completely shocking, but when I first came out here, there was no WeChat also. So there wasn't an organic way. If you weren't on Weibo, digging through early 2010 Weibo to figure out where people were, and if you weren't a social butterfly, if you talked to everyone, like there are some people, it doesn't matter where they are, you put them there 10 minutes later, they know where the next party is, they know where the best food is. I am not that person. I know where the bookstore is. So if you don't have WeChat, it was a lot harder then. So when I came back in 2016, the first thing I did is I got online, and there's like a forum called No Madness for Black travelers around the world. And I was like, hey guys, I'm moving to China. Is anyone out there? Someone was like, hey, add me on WeChat. And then I was thrown in to this giant, like Black, because No Madness is primarily Black Americans. I was thrown in immediately into Black American WeChat. And so what I actually found is it was harder to step out of that and meet other people, because once you're in that kind of bubble that's familiar but still different, because we're all the weird kids, so we're all the weird Black kids, all the ones who end up out here. So it it was the first bubble. And I remember I made a point. I came out here with my job, but I didn't know anyone that was out here before. My family's not out here. I didn't have any pre-existing friendships. So I made a point of, I would normally say I'm an introvert, made a point of being like extra outgoing, because in the city, you can very easily become a number, and there's nothing sadder than being in your apartment at home when you're trying to make new experiences because you haven't figured out how to make your way in socially. So that was how I found the community. As I looked online before I even got out here, I got tapped in on WeChat, and the WeChat groups, which WeChat groups all have their pluses and minuses, but at least at that point, people were sharing and talking, because WeChat, I think in 2016, was really just starting to become what now it is. Like, you can't be here without a WeChat. Back then, you kind of could, but now, I mean, you can't. So that got me started. I remember someone was doing a Thanksgiving at somebody's house, and I was aggressive. I was awkward. I was like, sign me up. I don't know none of y'all, but I'm going to be there because it's Black people. It's Thanksgiving, and it's my first time not being home for Thanksgiving. And so after that, I got connected to BlackX, which was based in Shanghai, and they did a lot of events that were focused on the Black diaspora and business-minded. And then I got connected with some people in different embassies, and we put on an event called Emoja, and that was a 2-day kind of celebration of the Black diaspora, because Emoja, I believe it means unity in Kiswahili. And so it was about making a thing for all of us to come together, because there were all these disparate groups that had popped up across Beijing, and they did their own events, and they were all good, but no one really ever came together. And there were so many people that if you met them in real life, you're like, oh, I don't really know you. And then you scan them on WeChat, and you're like, oh, we're WeChat friends. Oh, we've been talking. Oh, that's who you are. And so it was taking these digital friendships, these digital conversations, and we really wanted to put them to face. And so we did Emoja, and then that was successful. And so then after that was when I had the idea to do BlackExpo. And so that was kind of how I got really tapped into the Black community. It's very intentional, but I didn't really expect to be as Black-minded in China as I have been. I was expecting to come, get my nice little homestay family, learn how to make dumplings, like visit Shaolin Temple once in a while. And I did none of that. Instead, I became more aware of the Black diaspora, more aware of like different cultures from Africa. Ended up traveling to Africa because of the people that I've met out here. So ironically, China has been how I touched more on Black community, but it's also out of necessity. Like what what MC Tingbudong was saying is like you feel isolated. And so when you do feel isolated and you feel othered, just naturally by being in a homogenous society where people don't look like you look for that comfort. And I think we all hold on to each other more. And the beautiful thing of it is at home, we're all competing. Everyone's trying to be on top, especially in DC. Like people are trying to be on top and edge up. Out here, it's level playing field and everyone's just working together. Like it's hard already. We don't have to make it harder for each other. How about we help each other with the information that we do have? So I hope I answered your question, but that was kind of how I found community and how it all came together. Yeah. And so BlackExpo came out of that experience and is still going since then.
No, it's exciting to hear, you know, how you forge those connections with the Black diaspora. I know for myself as well, I ended up going to Africa because of the connections that I met in China. So it definitely forming a stronger Black identity. For you, Jamel, same question.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, you know, finding that tribe or finding that community, you know, I felt has just been really important, and that was just really key. And I think I had a fortunate experience in where I was able to connect, you know, pretty organically to like the hip hop community in 2008 or 2006, 7, 8 at places like Yugongi Shen, going to rap battles, you know, going to breakdancing sessions, you know, going and connecting with graffiti writers and really through the culture and through the culture of hip hop, actually being tapped into an audience of folks who were conglomerate and international. You know, I had a similar experience in you know, at University of International Business and Economics with where you had all the foreigners in one building and then all of the Chinese students in another building, and you know, but I recall those memories of like being in the foreigner dorm as like you know, it was like living at the UN or like with people from all around the world, and but the lingua franca was Chinese, and so you're like talking to folks from Korea or Mongolia or South Africa, and all of you guys are talking in Chinese, and I thought it was just like a really crazy kind of, you know, futuristic parallel universe where you had all these different kinds of people there. And so for me, that was, you know, kind of the first entree point was that, and finding ways to connect, and using culture in particular as a vessel to connect with others, and that I think really allowed me to find, you know, kind of find the tribe of folks that I would like connect with and would remain friends and remain tapped in with. I think once I got back to the United States, it was interesting to then find out the historical connections that I was actually a part of, as, you know, both as a Black American in China, and then, you know, as a Black American in China, as a revolutionary, you know, as someone who was taking up and looking at the perspective of like, you know, internationalism in the world, looking at folks like, you know, I'd made the song Chilai in 2018. That was really like a bilingual call against fascism. And then in 2019 was researching and had someone reach out to me named Alexandra, who was based out of Beijing, who was doing this story about Paul Robeson and, you know, the song Chilai, March of the Volunteers in the 1930s. And just was, you know, pointed this out to me. And so it just really became a thing of like, all right, well, you're actually part of a historical diaspora that actually has roots in a radical and revolutionary culture that was about transforming and building a whole new world, right? And that wasn't along these lines of like, how do you represent U.S. interests? I mean, it was actually about, you know, the Black Panther Party was holding up Mao, right? It was actually about how do you actually transform society? And so, you know, I think that really helped to deepen and contextualize and enrich the work that I was doing. And then in particular, in the time that we're in now, with so many divisions amongst, you know, Black American communities and Asian communities, both domestically and internationally, in the wake of coronavirus and, you know, and all the xenophobia that went along and has gone along with that. You know, I think we're at a time now where there is a huge opportunity, and more than an opportunity, a great need to fill actually bringing these two sections of people together. And there's a real role for everybody that's in the chat that's interested in this kind of work to play in that. And so, you know, I would say, you know, in the trajectory of my study from researching hip hop to becoming MC Tingbudong, to rapping in bilingually in English and Chinese, and being kind of a vessel for the connection between China and Black America, but then also like the history of Chinese hip hop, which a lot of Chinese folks who are now watching Rap of China, et cetera, don't actually know about the political history or the politicized history of hip hop in China. Through that experience, it's all been about finding your tribe. I think, that's been a real important connection. And then also locating that historically. And right now we have a need to actually bring these two communities together urgently.
So we're running out of time. So Elsa, I wanted to give you the last question. Essentially, I know that you're definitely, dedicated to promoting Latin American people to go into China and working in the China space. So what advice would you give to Latin American students and young people, as well as just people of color in general, about, entering the China space, working in government, or going to China overall?
Yeah, I'd say my biggest advice is researching what you can do that you're passionate about in China. Whatever it is, there's a space for it. And I felt that a lot of my friends that did Schwarzman, a lot of them ended up staying and creating, their own companies there, joining think tanks there, and continuing that research while they were in China. Similar to the last question, when I was in China, I actually never felt more connected to Latin Americans than I did while I was there. And I felt like I made so many friends from Mexico, Dominican Republic, Chile, Argentina, and I had never really been exposed to that side of the world when I was in New York or in Vermont. And so I think that for people that are concerned about will they find a community, the community is pretty small and it's really filled with open arms. And so I felt that in any space that I navigated, whether it was a conference or at Tsinghua or just going out dancing, people from Latin America were very open to meeting me and meeting other scholars. And so I think that, pushing yourself to apply and then actually going is the first step, but making an effort to find that community isn't too difficult, at least for Latin Americans, because if you go to the main dancing spots, they'll be all around anyway. So I highly recommend to go to China and just take a risk.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you for those insights, Elsa. So thank you, Elsa, Jamel, and Olivia. Thank you for coming and giving your insights. How can people connect with you? Drop a link or your email or your LinkedIn into the chat. And now we'll go over to the stage for a conversation with Allison Freeman. Thank you, everyone. Bye.